evening and welcome to the Thai PBS World. The prospect of the global economy is not quite uplifting, especially according to the report by the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, which has launched a report on regional economic outlook for Asia and Pacific. The report has emphasized that the global is experiencing synchronized slowdown of the economy because of rising trade barriers and rising geopolitical tensions. The IMF Deputy Director of the Asia Pacific Department, Jonathan Astry, is in Thailand after Singapore to present the Asia Pacific Regional Economic Outlook. The finding indicates that the first half of this year, the economic growth is slower because of rising trade barriers and geopolitical tensions. Asia is expected to grow 5.0% this year and 5.1% in 2020. This shows the slowest pace of expansion for Asia since the global financial crisis. During an interview with Mr. Astry, I asked the implication of trade barriers, especially between the US and China, to Thailand and the region.
So I think it's important to think about what is going on in this region in the global context, because we are also seeing a synchronized slowdown in the entire world, with growth expected to be around 3% this year and only picking up slightly next year. So that's very much of a piece with the numbers you just gave for Asia, which is about 5 this year and only a slight pickup next year. Why is Asia being revised down in this fashion? I think it's the same forces that are driving the global economic outlook lower. It's the trade tensions, it's the China slowdown, it's manufacturing, it's global investment, it's global trade, it's electronics. All of these factors are focal points for the Asian economies. And so it's not surprising, perhaps, that Asia should have been revised down in a similar fashion to the rest of the world. Now, what I would say is that Asia is still, relatively speaking, a growth powerhouse. Even in this slowdown, Asia is contributing more than 2/3, indeed some 70% of global growth this year.
Regarding trade barrier between the US and China, it seems there is some room of more flexibility. Would that be enough to uplift the economic growth? Will that lead to more revision of the global economic growth and the region growth in the near future?
We took note of the understandings that the US and China reached on October 11th that have resulted in no tariff increase in mid-October and possible delay in the December scheduled tariff increases. We think that imparts a small upside risk to our growth forecast. But of course, there are many uncertainties that continue to plague the outcome of these trade tensions, and no clear path at present for resolving those deep underlying issues, be they with respect to intellectual property protection, technology transfer, state-owned enterprise subsidization, and so forth. So what we have said is that if the global economy and Asia in turn are to get back on a sound footing, we have to move beyond trade truces to genuine trade peace. And that means confronting, and the political will to confront, these fundamental underlying issues that I mentioned, and restore primacy of place to a rules-based multilateral trade system that can actually give more certainty to investors and firms, so that we can move on beyond this period where really investment is being held back.
Do you see the coming forces of other grouping in the world, like BRICS, ASEAN, or other regions of the world, can be more forceful in terms of changing the rule of the games in terms of trade. Otherwise, the US and China perhaps just carry on having trade tension, and it causes negative impact for the whole world. What's the force of other regions as far as you can see?
Well, I agree with the premise of your question, which is it's very important for all countries and all groupings to lead by example. So if we just take ASEAN as an example, I think ASEAN has made important strides in encouraging regional integration. And I think there is more that ASEAN can do to liberalize trade in goods, trade in services, rules relating to foreign direct investments, rules relating to labor mobility, even sensitive issues like agriculture and steel. So I think key to promoting growth within this region on a sustained basis will be more liberalization. And that is in the self-interest of all the countries of ASEAN. But I also think it can have a salutary spillover, positive spillover effect on the rest of the world to show that many countries believe in multilateralism, believe in openness, and are willing to move forward to integrate more in order to bring about sustained growth in their own economies and in the regions in which they operate, and indeed in the world. So leading by example, I think, is very important for all the groupings you mentioned, particularly in today's environment. There are threats to globalization and integration that are proving very costly for all the countries of the world and for the world as a whole.
What's the worst case scenario you can see if trade tension carry on this path?
There are many downside risks to the present situation. So we have revised down our forecast, as we discussed a few moments ago. But even with that downward revision, there are many risks, and risks are skewed to the downside. And escalating trade tensions, more fragmentation of the global multilateral system is probably the most important of those downside risks. There are others, to be sure. China has its own process moving from high speed to high quality growth, and its economy is slowing over time and is expected to slow further over the medium term. If that process goes faster and further, that can have spillover effects. We have downside risks related to global financial risk appetite. We have risks related to oil prices. So there are many, many downside risks on the horizon. But deglobalization, a reversal of the process that has lifted so many billions of people out of poverty over the past decades. Putting that into reverse, more fragmentation, is probably uppermost in our assessment of downside risks for the global economy.
For the Asia and Pacific in particular, the upcoming ASEAN summit next week, in which Thailand is chair, is expected to reach conclusion, especially on RCEP, can be seen as another positive factor for the global economy. And that's all from Thai PBS World Tonight.